Welcome, everyone. My name is Becky, and I'm a librarian with Spokane Public Library, and I am excited to introduce today's program, The President is Coming to Town in 1901, presented by local author Patricia Meredith. Her newest book, Cupboards All Bared, has been released, and we are working on getting it added to the library catalog. In the meantime, if you haven't read the first book in that series, and it's called Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries series, then check out Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker, which is available for checkout in print, book, ebook, and audiobook formats, and we'll drop those links in the chat. Today's program will be archived in our Facebook live stream videos. Please share with anyone else who is interested in Spokane history. Also check out upcoming virtual and in-person programs on our website calendar and Facebook events page. Any questions submitted during this presentation via chat will be answered at the end. Then we will transition to Q&A for the participants. My screen changed. Okay, for the participants who have joined via Zoom, and that part won't be live streamed to protect participant privacy. I will now read a land acknowledgement and we will get started. I am on the traditional homelands of the four bands of the Spokane Tribe of Indians, Upper Band, Middle Band, Lower Band, Chewelah Band. Since time immemorial, sorry, it's glitching. Okay, the Spokane Tribe of Indians has lived and cared for these grounds, identifying themselves as flesh of the earth. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We show gratitude to the land, river, and peoples who have been fishing, hunting, harvesting, and gathering here for generations. May we learn from one another's stories so that we may nurture the relationship of the people of the Spokane Tribe and to all those who share this land. All right, Patricia, go ahead and get started.
All right, hello. Thank you for having me, Spokane Public Library. This is so exciting. This is my fifth or sixth presentation through the library. So it's been awesome to get to share with so many people over the last 2-3 years. It was pre-pandemic when I did my first presentation before the publication of book 1, Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker, in the Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries. And as Becky said, we just released Cupboards All Bared, which is book 2, came out in May. The Spokane Public Library is currently in the process of getting copies available. But in the meantime, I highly recommend that you read book 1 so that you are ready for book 2 when it gets to you, because it is a series. And so you'll want to read them in order to follow all the events. So this first book is, the second book is Cupboards All Bared. And I'm just going to read what it's about. A body discovered in Hangman Creek looks to be the result of an accidental fall, but what begins as a simple mystery for Thomas Carew and his twin brother Bernard quickly becomes a lot more complicated, including implications that tie in with the bombings at the Idaho mines, and perhaps even President McKinley's planned visit. Those familiar with Spokane will love the entangled web that takes us from Hangman Creek to the Campbell House and the Montvale, ensuring that this story couldn't be set anywhere but our beloved Spokane. And that's what I want to look at today, is a little bit more about the historical locations that are included, that are featured in Cupboards All Bared. So as I said, it is available in print, ebook, and audiobook, wherever books are sold, and it will be coming to the Spokane Public Library here soon. You can get it if you're coming from other places. You can request it through your local library. There are some other libraries that are carrying it already. So check with your library and see if they have a copy already. And it's so far what I've seen is people sending me pictures of it being on hold. So put it on hold so you're next in line. So as I said, book 2. So we'll be looking at the Campbells, Hangman Creek, and the Montvale Hotel as the main featured locations in this second book. With this book in particular, I tried to feature places that you can still visit today. So that made it a little bit more exciting for people who are reading the book. If they've been to Spokane or if they're planning to come to Spokane, you can actually go to these locations and walk the murder site and walk where the main suspects live. And you can stay even at the Montvale Hotel. So we'll get more into that in a minute. So this all started because I was doing research for book 1, Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker, which was originally set in May, around the first week of May. And I came across this article published in the Spokane Chronicle. And it's just proof that nosing around and going down long rabbit trails of research are very influential to my writing, because this basically wrote the second book for me. When I came across this article, and it says, President, his guest, the nation's ruler is to share A.B. Campbell's home. Hoist the flag. The Committee on Decorations appeals to all citizens. And as you're glancing through the article, you can see that they had huge entertainment plans for President McKinley. This would have been his second term in office. It was a huge deal. He was touring the entire United States, but he was originally from Ohio, as were the Campbells. And so they were going to stay with them. And I love how at the end, they get a statement from Mr. Campbell, and he says, yes, President and Mrs. McKinley are to be our guests. That has been understood for some time, and the arrangements are being made with that in view. I do not want any publicity about the matter, but as far as that is concerned, I don't know that it makes any difference. So he was ready for whatever came his way. So the Spokane Clock Tower Mysteries all follow the construction of the Spokane Clock Tower, which is a very iconic building here in Spokane. You can still visit it down at Riverfront Park. Unfortunately, the rest of the depot is no longer there. They tore it down during Expo 74, which came to Spokane in 1974, go figure. But the clock tower is still there. And so I decided to set up the whole series around the building of the depot and the clock tower, placing my own creation, my own character in as the designer of the clock itself. Although I had found resources that stated the company that built it, Seth Thomas out of Connecticut, but they probably would have sent the clock just across country. And instead I decided to place my designer in there in order to get a story going. So if you look on my website, you can find a complete list of the order of the building of the clock tower. And you'll see why I ended up going with April for the first book, and then May, and then it continues on. And my whole plan is 12 or 13 books spanning until June 1902, when they dedicate the clock tower and the depot. So as you can tell, the first book is April, second book is May, and so the third book, which we'll be releasing in October, is in June. And then I'm actually working on book 4, which will be set in July. So that's been really fun to think about how can I show Spokane, how it changes over the course of the year. So if you want to see those, you can visit my website, which is patricia-meredith.com, and I'll give that to you again at the end. So who are the Campbells? Like, why is this so cool? Even if you're from Spokane, you might not have heard of the Campbell House. So I'm going to give you a little introduction to them. So the Campbell House was built in 1898 by Kirtland Cutter, and it has been refitted with all the trappings of the home circa 1910, and it is available for visits and tours. So that means that you can visit it today, just as it's described in my book. At Christmas time, it comes to life with actors playing roles of people who've lived in the house over time. And this includes my audiobook narrator, Rebecca Cook, who plays Huldah, the Campbell's cook, at Christmas time. So that's super exciting. And I was very excited when she agreed to do the audiobooks. And she has done the first 3 for me. So the Campbell House is located next to the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture and the Ferris Archives, which is where I do practically all of my research. It's wonderful to get hands-on with all the things from Spokane's history. And it's the perfect inspirational location for a story set in Gilded Age Spokane. So when I stumbled across this article, I thought now is the perfect time to have a story featuring the Campbells. So I'm going to share a reading with you from book 2, where my main detective, Bernard Carew, who is he was made up for story purposes, but everybody else on the police force, so he and his twin brother were made up. So it's Bernard and Thomas Carew. And then everybody else on the police force, though, are real people from history. So that's been really fun to intersperse those cameos throughout the books, because you'll get to know them more with each book building on each other. So, all right, we're going to start with Bernard. 6 houses down from the place Mr. London had just, let me start over. 6 houses down from the place Mr. London had stepped out into Hangman Creek, Bernard was finally answered with something other than "never heard of him." "Mr. London, ain't he the nervous fella who was working next door for Mr. Campbell?" The gardener stood with an oil rag in one hand and a bottle in the other, just outside Mr. Finch's garden gate. Everyone in Spokane knew which houses belonged to John Finch, William Wakefield, and Amasa Campbell, as they were 3 of the grandest homes built by Kirtland Cutter in Brown's addition. Bernard took a moment to admire the 3 houses, for even though they were all designed by Cutter, they were each built in a completely different style. Let's go inside. Finch's 3-story residence was completely white with columns like a Greek temple in the neoclassical revival style. Wakefield's was Mission Revival with a whitewashed stucco exterior and an orange tiled roof. Meanwhile, Campbell's 3-story feat of timber and brick brought to mind the English Tudors. There was a main house, a clearly defined service wing to the right, and a carriage house tucked behind them both. Bernard gauged each of the entrances. The impressive, assertive front door that said, "Here lives a great man," or the more modest side door that led to the wing. He decided to try the humble door first, as he didn't want to disturb the entire household if Mr. Finch's gardener had been wrong. Squaring his shoulders and straightening his derby, he strode toward the door determinedly. After ringing the bell and knocking, he was greeted kindly by a housemaid. She was small and blonde, probably in her late 20s, with a nose and mouth that suggested to Bernard a Swedish background. Bernard introduced himself and handed over his card. The maid immediately invited him in. "Are you here to speak with Mr. Campbell? I'm afraid he's not in at the moment, but he should be returning shortly." "I'm not certain yet, to be honest," replied Bernard, looking around the small entryway. Across from him were several doors and the bottom of a winding staircase in the corner. On the wall to his left hung an annunciator call bell system with a collection of labeled brass arrows pointing to whomever had rung for the servants, and that's what's pictured right there. The maid reached up and pushed a small button hidden under the device, resetting the side door arrow that had apparently moved when Bernard rang the bell. And the fun thing about the annunciator is that it still works. So I was actually able to see how it works. They actually set it off for me when I went to visit the Campbell House and then showed me how to reset it. So there you go. I'm going to skip a little bit because I don't want to give away too much of the book, but I wanted to get to a part where Bernard actually is welcomed into the home and he takes a tour through the house. So I wanted to do that so that you can see it with some pictures. Oh, we're not there yet. Hold on. Go back a little bit. I'm just going to replay this. You can see it as it unfolds. The maid asked him to wait in the reception room while she checked to see if Mrs. Campbell was available. She led him through a side door into the main house, and he noticed immediately the darker stained oak paneling in contrast to the lighter pine that had marked the servant's side, something he'd also seen done in Miss Mitchell's home, which is in the first book. Down a short hallway, he passed a large open dining room dominated by an ornately blue and white tiled fireplace at one end of a long shining table. They rounded a magnificent grand staircase that took a sharp corner on a midway landing, so Bernard could not see what lay at the top, passing a beautiful grandfather clock that told the time as well as the day, month, and location of the sun, something he knew Prescott would love to get his hands on, and Prescott is my clock inventor. Turning back from the clock, he almost hit his head on a low-hanging ornate electric chandelier at the bottom of the grand staircase. Clearly, the designer had not planned on men taller than Mr. Campbell passing through. And that comes in because that actually happened to me. I was walking through the house and a 6-foot-tall man behind me knocked his head against the chandelier at the bottom of the grand staircase. So it all is based on truth. The maid led Bernard down a small set of stairs into a foyer, reminiscent of a castle with thick, dark oak beams crisscrossing the ceiling, and even an ornate tapestry lining the walls, depicting windmills and castle ruins amongst a forest of trees. It made him wish he'd entered via the front door rather than the back. From this vantage point, however, he could see an impressive suit of armor hanging above the front door, an odd collection, considering it looked to comprise a Spanish breastplate and helmet, Chinese swords, Turkish axes, and standard gauntlets. And there it is right there. Off either side of the foyer were 2 large pocket doorways. One led into the largest room in the house, a living room, filled with tables, chairs, a grand piano, and a cozy inglenook fireplace. The other led to a sitting room, a very unique sitting room. To begin with, it was pink, The couches were pink, the chairs were pink, the walls were lined in pink silk. Heavy rose-colored velvet draperies embroidered with gold filigree hung across the leaded windows. The ceiling was white in contrast, sculpted with acanthus leaves, interlaced with twisting vines in an elaborate design. The pink was broken by gold filigree lining the cornices, the chandelier, the rococo curlicued molding, and the ostentatious white marble fireplace, inlaid with rose gold scroll work, above which hung a gigantic mirror that reflected all the pink and gold back upon him again. Now, he knew some might think that Rosalind, his wife, had gone a little overboard with the Swiss bear furniture in their own front parlor, but this right here was a woman's reception room worthy of Versailles. So then the maid will come back and we'll see what happens next, but you'll have to pick up the book to read it. So that's a little example of how I incorporated the Campbell House, the actual house itself. It's very much a feature in the story, and they come back to it and they go through different rooms. And so I wanted to share a little bit more with you of that. As you can see, I tried to incorporate as many as possible of the visible aspects of the house that you can still see today, like the armor and the annunciator and the reception room. The museum has done an incredible job of collecting as many historical artifacts as possible in connection to the Campbell's life in Spokane, including items originally owned by them that they've hunted down through the years. The dining room is almost completely made up of original items, like the sideboard right there with the tea set on it. So those were originally owned by the Campbells. And I just think that is so cool that they tracked these items down. And the statue and the art that's hanging on the walls, it's all original Campbell, which is just so neat. And they also have Helen's wedding dress. So Helen is the daughter, and I'll introduce you to the Campbells here in a second. But that is her actual wedding dress, which I think is just gorgeous. So here we go. Here's an introduction. A mesa, and it is pronounced a mesa. His wife refers to him as Mace in letters from the time. So that's how I remember it. So it's a Mesa Campbell, and he was married to Grace Campbell, and their daughter was Helen Campbell, and they just had the one daughter. And she was about 8 or 9 at the time of the book. She was their only child, and descriptions of all 3 are based on these portraits. So when you read the book, you'll see I specifically describe them wearing these outfits, and their hair is that way, even though these portraits were painted in 1904. So it's been 3 years. Helen is actually 12 in the picture, so she of course grew up a little bit. But that's how I decided to describe them, because you can actually still see those paintings hanging in the Campbell House. You can also view them on the Campbell House website, which I'll have a link to at the end. After building a fortune in the mines of Idaho, the Campbell family moved to Spokane in 1898, and he quickly became a leader and known entity in the city. And a lot of their history is incorporated into the book. So to learn more, you can read that. In 1901, the Campbells had 5 live-in staff. So I was able to find the 1900 census of the household. So I could describe specifically like who was answering the door. It's a young Swedish woman. So it was either Carrie or Matilda. And I knew their ages. I knew where they had immigrated from. I knew how long they had been in the United States. So that's just super fun to have those details. The only character that did not make an appearance in the book was actually the gardener, because he wasn't working all the time. He was a come and go gardener, which in May he would have been getting his hands dirty by then. But I decided to instead focus more on Joseph Gladding, because he's the only one we actually have pictures of, other than the Campbells. We don't have pictures of Matilda, Carrie, Chung Lee, Kirk, Joseph, or the James Ahern, and then there's a couple others, the Chances and the Kate at the bottom. And it was interesting also how it included the fact at the bottom there was a note that said entire household can read, write, speak English, and commented how long Helen had been in school, that the house is owned, and that there's no farmland. So it was just they owned 6 parcels, and those were slowly sold off over the years, but eventually to the museum, which is why the museum is next door. So But I wanted to focus on Joseph Gladding because he is the only one we have pictures of. And these are from the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture. If you go on their website, you can find a lot of photographs. They have some from when he was younger. He was with the Campbells for an extensive period of time. And again, I talk a lot about that in the book because of course they go to interview him so he can talk about, oh, well, I met Mr. Campbell in Ohio and then he offered me a job and I moved out here and I've been with them ever since. And you can actually see, if you look up close on the picture there, which I don't think I can zoom in, Helen is actually in the carriage behind him, sitting there peeking out the window. So, and then they've got their horse and carriage. So the Campbells were actually, they never bought a car until after Mr. Campbell had died. Because he was in a horrific accident when they went to Egypt. He broke both of his arms in an automobile accident while they were visiting Egypt, which happens after my book. But that was why they never got an electric car until he passed away. And then Mrs. Campbell was like, "Now's my chance. I'm going to get an electric car." So they have a 1910 Baker Electric. And unfortunately, they have not been able to track down their exact car, but they have that exact model of car in the carriage house that you can go visit. So I've been inside it, I know how to drive it, and that's what the car in the book is based on, which I get a little bit more into in the third book. But that's Joseph. One of the other really fun things that I was able to incorporate into the book was one of the things that Joseph did was he trained Helen's dog, who was a little white dog, to do circus tricks. So she had a little pony and a little dog, and he would set up all these tricks for in the backyard for Helen and all of her friends and have them over, and they would eat ice cream and fresh berries and watch the circus in the backyard, which I think is just the coolest and sweetest thing. So I was able to incorporate that into the books. It's fun to find those little things that were able to make the story come to life. So as I mentioned, Mesa's friendship with President McKinley was a real thing. Here are a few of the letters that they have at the archives where he specifically mentions McKinley's imminent arrival. So in a letter to Kip back in April 27th, 1901, he says, "The president will be out to visit us about the 26th of May and will be in Spokane for 2 days and will stop with me." And then when he's writing to his brother, he says the president and his wife, and this is now after that article has been published in the Spokesman Review, actually, because that was on May 7th. So it was published in the Chronicle, which is the Chronicle was the evening paper, the Spokesman Review was the morning paper, and eventually they were bought and owned by the same person, which is why sometimes it's confusing to remember which one it was published in. So, but on the 8th, he said, "The president and his wife are going to stop with me while in Spokane Sunday and Monday." And then in a letter to a Mr. Ford on the 11th, he says, "Grace and I are going to have the president with us for 2 days while stops in Spokane." And then I love this. "This is all arranged and I guess we can take care of him." I just love that. So the other fun thing with finding these letters from Mesa was I was able to incorporate some of the things that he said about the mines, about the labor disputes that were happening. All of that is very pertinent to the book, to the action in the book. And because I had his actual letters, I was able to take lines literally straight out of Campbell's mouth and put them into his mouth again in my book, which is just super fun because it just really ties it in to that local history. So let's see. Let's get a little bit more into, so on McKinley Day, so in the Spokesman Review, May 15th, 1901, they published this great article about all the plans for President McKinley and what he'll specifically be doing every hour of the day. Now, my detective character, Bernard, when he's handed this article, he makes a comment about how is that really smart to be listing out exactly where the president is going to be every day. And one of the things to remember is that McKinley's one of the first to have security around him. And in fact, they will be there when he is assassinated in September of 1901. So he survives until September. But the loophole where I loved to put in my story was asking, well, he didn't make it to Spokane. His wife ends up getting sick and he is unable to make it all the way to Spokane. But if he had, would he have maybe been assassinated sooner? So you'll have to find out by reading the book. But in the meantime, they had some incredible things planned. And it specifically, again, mentions that they'll be staying at the Campbell residence, that it'll be Mr. and Mrs. McKinley and her maid and physician. And then it talks about everybody who's coming with them, including like almost all the cabinet members. And then there's newspaper men that are traveling with them. And it was a huge entourage. It was like royalty coming to stay at your house, right? You read about, Queen Elizabeth making travels around England and staying at the Lord's manor house and bringing her entire entourage with her. And it was a huge deal. Well, it was a huge deal for the Campbells to be hosting the McKinleys, of course. So it was very interesting getting to really get into that. And if you want to read these articles and all the other articles, I published all of the articles leading up to the events of the book. And then a few of the articles that happened during the events of the book are all on my website. So you can go read those. So now we're going to jump to Hangman Creek. So I briefly mentioned that. Of course, the body is found in Hangman Creek. And again, I wanted to do that because the Campbells live 6 houses away, according to the earlier maps. They're now a lot more houses in between them and Hangman Creek. But at the time, it was 6 houses. So again, I was able to look at the Sanborn maps at the time to actually count the houses, to know how many they were going to go by. I was going to have him stop at certain ones and just ran out of time in the book. So I had him jump to the Finches and the Wakefields, which are right next to the Campbells. And again, are houses you can still view today. There are people actually living in them, but you can walk up to them and you can take pictures of them, which is really cool. So basically you can walk the murder site. You can walk from Hangman Creek, where the body is found, all the way to the Campbell house and then toward the Campbell house. So it's pretty cool. So once I knew the events of the second book had to include the McKinley's visit and the Campbells, I tied it into Hangman Creek because I went to this beautiful park. It's called Overlook Park, and it's right along the edge leading down to Hangman Creek. And it was while I was sitting there that I realized, yeah, this is where it absolutely has to happen. So I'll read you the prologue as you're viewing this beautiful view. This is how we open the book. Mr. London wished he was a dragon. Then, instead of simply blowing out ferocious smoke clouds through his mouth and nose, he might also devour anyone who stood in the way of what he wanted. He just couldn't catch a break. He should have known. He should have known things were going too smoothly. He'd made himself invaluable, done everything required of him and more. Now it was all gone. Poof. He blew out more cigarette smoke from between his lips. He'd lied to give himself a purpose because that's what he'd been told to do. He'd come to Spokane for one reason and had stayed in Spokane for another. And now he found himself pacing the bluff that hung over Hangman Creek, the wind whistling in his ears and biting his red cheeks, threatening a spring rain shower as he looked out across the deep ravine carved over the years by what was now just a creek. A thin, rocky, very slippery path led down the slope to his left, but his feet wanted so desperately to take the shorter way down. Hangman Creek, it was called, where Colonel Wright hanged a Yakima Indian chief in the 1850s without a trial. The city wanted to call it Latah Creek, but that name could only be found on maps of the area. He wondered what they'd call it if they found another body. So that is still true today. All the locals know it as Hangman Creek. If you ask where Latah Creek is, you get a funny look. What creek are you talking about? Oh, Hangman Creek. Oh, yeah, I know what that is. It's right below where the Campbells are. Yep. So off of Brown's Edition. So I went there to Overlook Park, and I had the butterflies in my stomach, and I thought, oh my goodness, it would be so easy to just misstep and go whoo down into the river. And so I thought, yep, it's time to put a body in the river. So that's what happened. And then the Campbells were right down the road to be the lead suspects, and I could tie it all into McKinley. So that's how the story was born. I was super excited to include Hangman Creek also because of photographs that I had found from Dear Mother. So Dear Mother is a collection of letters sent home from Spokane in 1901, whose descriptions provided the basis for many of my characters' perceptions of their surroundings. They are written by Marinus Cromlin, who came over from Amsterdam and then wrote many letters home to his mother, but also he was a photographer which means his family, who is wonderful and amazing, have collected them all and translated them from the original Dutch into English so that I can read them. And I can see all of his wonderful photographs, including, you can see right there, the clock tower right above the falls. So it's super cool to look at these photographs. And he included some of Hangman Creek. So I was like, this is awesome. So Hangman Creek winding into Washington's wilderness. So you can see that this time it's much more, I guess you couldn't really see in the video, but right behind me are like apartment houses and all the old houses of Brown's Edition. And at this time it was much more wilderness. Also Hangman Creek stretches for quite a ways. It goes underneath bridges and down and around and quite a ways. So but I love his photographs. It's just so cool. So because he's a photographer, one of my main characters is also a photographer, and she uses the same brand that he does. So that way I can have her basically taking similar snapshots. Though Marinus himself will be featured in a future book, because I now am in contact with the family and they just thought that would be the coolest thing. So he will be definitely making a cameo in a future book once he gets to Spokane. He arrives in October, so sometime after then. But right there, you can see the railroad trestle across Hangman Creek. You could see in the today, it is now built up. There's more roads there. There's Sunset Boulevard and all through there. Here's a close-up of I think it's the bridge that's further down at the lower end of Hangman Creek. But it says the sign on the bridge reads $10 fine for riding or driving over the bridge faster than a walk. So even at that time, so riding would have been mostly bicycles at this time. There's lots of people using bicycles. It was freedom. And in fact, Marinus describes it as such and talks about getting a bicycle in his letters, which is just so much fun. So, but it was still mostly horse and cart. There were only, from what I can find, there were only about 5 automobiles owned by people in Spokane in 1901. So I do give one to one of my characters in the first book. So that way I can talk a little bit about automobiles and it becomes important later. But yeah, it's interesting to think, how it was all designed for horses and buggies. And actually the infrastructure that comes from us having bicycles is why the automobile, part of why the automobile worked when it came into being. It's one of those historical things where you're like, okay, this could not have happened without this happening first. Bicycles had to come first because they provided the infrastructure of laying down asphalt and making these flat roads through cities and coming up with directions, the putting out your hand to say, I'm turning right, things like that. That was originally how people drove in their automobiles. You had to honk a certain way, just like a horn on a bicycle, or stick your hand out to show where you were turning. There was no turning lights. Not that anybody uses them today anyway, but that's where they came from. So, and then I love this, just a cow pasture in the Hangman Creek area. I don't know where this is along the way, but this was definitely, an unmodernized area. And it was just down the road from Brown's Edition, which was the up and coming area. And throughout all of this, you can see a lot of the telephone poles, which actually most of them are probably telegraph poles at this point. But again, the infrastructure that came from telegraph is why the telephone then worked. Because we had the infrastructure for telegraph, they already had the poles built, they already had the wires in there. And then it just became a question of doing the wireless and all of that, and the whole fight between Edison and Tesla and all of that, which is all happening in 1901. So 1901 has ended up being a very interesting year to be setting these historical books, because there's just so much happening, so much news coming out of the world, including in Spokane. Who knew that Spokane played such a big part? So it's pretty cool. So now we're going to head to the Montvale Hotel. So like I said, you can actually stay at the Montvale Hotel today. But back when it was first built, it was a little bit different. It was built in 1899 by probate judge John Binkley as one of the first single room occupancy hotels in Spokane. And single room occupancy hotels were specifically built for the laborers who were coming into town and leaving town. So it was a lot of the middle class. And it was built specifically for people who were not going to be there for too long. So the rooms were like, I think it's like $1. It was $1 or $2 a day. And then, no, it was $1 or $2 a week and $5 a month. So sign me up for that rental because that sounds amazing. As you can see from the outside, the entrance, some locals might be like, wait a minute, that's not the entrance to the Montvale. And you're right. The entrance to the Montvale today is off of First Street, but originally it was on Monroe. So this is the original entrance. It actually looked more like that. It had the lettering above it, Montvale. And that has been removed, obviously, and they've rebuilt that area. And so it's still there, but it's actually the back exit. Like you can't go in that way now. Now you have to go in the front way, right, and sign in. But once you're in the hotel, you can leave that way. So that changed once I discovered that on the maps. That changed. I'd actually originally written the scenes as though they were coming in the front way. And then I learned, no, it was actually the back way, because on the lower level, on the First Street level, was a hardware store. And so that was all the main level. And then there were apartments above, which was most of downtown. Almost all of downtown was set up that way, where it was a business on the base level and then apartments above. And then they were divided into blocks, and they were normally owned, like somebody owned the block, owned the Montvale block, and then rented out to businesses below, apartments above, and then usually lived in the penthouse up top, right? That's where the penthouse comes from. In the Montvale, you go inside and go up the stairs originally. So I think this was where I was going to read one more section from my book, where the brothers go to search a room. So this is actually within the hotel, and I've got some original photographs there. I was able to find the historic listing for the Montvale, and they had included all of these pictures of it before the hotel company bought it and refinished it. So these are pictures from much later in the hotel's history. I think it was like in the 60s when it was redone, might be even later. But it's still, you can see all the basic structure is still the same. So it's really cool to see these old photographs. So let me find that. Yeah, here we go. So now you'll get to meet Thomas too. So Bernard and Thomas are twins. They are identical, but Bernard wears a beard, and Thomas is clean shaven and is slightly shorter and thinner. But they are identical. They are actually greatly inspired by some twin friends that my husband and I used to know, who were built that way. They were identical, but they still look different. You could tell the difference. So that's the two of them, and it's just so much fun to write them because they banter all the time, as brothers are wont to do. So Bernard took a step back to get a view of the building, noting the sign that read Montvale Hotel Apartments and another that read Housekeeping in big, bold print. The Montvale block was a beautiful 3-story building of red brick on the corner of First and Monroe, the hotel apartments being on the 2nd and 3rd floors, while the 1st floor boasted 5 commercial spaces. The brothers entered via the impressive brick archway off Monroe Street with Montvale lettered above the double doors. They entered the building from this east side and went up a flight of grand stairs to the main lobby. Bright, natural light spilled upon them from a magnificent skylight above. At the front desk, the manager who'd spoken to Bernard was retrieved. Mr. Myers agreed to allow them into Mr. Boni's room, grabbing a room key from under the counter before leading them across the atrium lobby toward a 2nd floor corner room. Doors to rooms circled the central area. So this is the main entrance. You're coming in. So actually on the left is what the entrance looks like now. And on the right is the original entrance. So they have to come up those stairs and then check in at the desk up at the top of the stairs instead of being on the 1st floor. So there's the Montvale. You've got the old pictures and you got the new pictures. So you can compare them. So doors to rooms circled the central area. The staircase in the corner led up to a 3rd floor with an overlook balcony, so they could see the door of every room in the place by simply standing in the middle of the high-roofed atrium. The only way to access the residential 2nd and 3rd floors is the way you came in. It would be difficult for someone to enter the hotel without the front desk's notice, Mr. Myers pointed out as they walked. Or vice versa, I would assume, Bernard said. Mr. Myers nodded. That's why I'm certain no one at the Montvale has seen Mr. Pavoni since Thursday. I asked the entire staff, just to be sure, after meeting with you. Is there a doorman? Bernard asked. The manager shook his head. No, but the front desk is always manned. What if the clerk is called out on important business, like a bathroom break? Thomas asked, ever the realist. Mr. Myers grimaced, either at the improper question or the suggestion that there was indeed a time someone could go in or out without notice. Bernard couldn't tell. No, Mr. Myers said adamantly. If the desk is ever left unattended, the front door is locked from the inside. Only the staff have a key to that entrance. He shook his own collection of keys to illustrate his point. A thief might get in that way, thought Bernard. But they weren't looking for a thief this time. They were looking for a missing political figure. Could a guest with a secret visitor simply open the door and allow them in? Thomas asked. Mr. Myers grimaced again. Yes, I suppose so, but I cannot be held responsible for the actions of all our guests. So really anyone could get in or out of this place quite easily, Bernard thought. But then what did he expect? It was just a hotel. Downstairs is commercial only? Bernard asked. Yes, Mr. Myers answered easily, obviously eager to move off the lack of security in his hotel. And there's 2 floors of rooms? Yes, 60 total, with 30 on this floor and 30 on the 3rd floor. The manager knocked before unlocking number 206 and opening the door onto a small, simply furnished corner room. There was a bed and not much else, unless one counted the dresser with a mirror next to one of the windows, and an armless chair with a suitcase set atop the seat. The 2 windows looked out across First and Monroe, the Review building just visible a couple blocks north. Shared washrooms? Thomas asked. Common ones, yes, one for women and one for men on each floor. Each has 2 toilets and 1 bathtub with hot and cold water provided at all times. Mr. Myers seemed proud of this, and rightly so. Thank you, said Bernard, leading the way in. We won't be but a moment. The manager took his cue, asked that they'd let him know when and should they find anything, and closed the door as he left. But I won't tell you what they found. You'll have to read the book to find out what they find. So the fun part, again, was that I got to actually walk around the Montvale. There's the beautiful atrium. You stand in the sky in the center. You look straight up, and the skylight is still there. So they kept that part of the structure again, and it just provides this beautiful natural light into that main area all throughout. So as you probably noticed from that other picture, there were extra doors, right? So there was more doors. Well, they've had to rearrange the rooms, of course, and add personal bathrooms to each of the bedrooms for modern guests. So there's not common washrooms anymore. So I'll show you a picture eventually of the rooms. This is actually, again, they had actually started adding the plumbing. The corner cupboard there, the white, it looks like a closet in the corner. That's actually a washroom. That's a toilet in one of the bedrooms. So they had started doing that. That's why I think this is from the 60s or 70s. So they had gone ahead and modernized it a little bit in each of the rooms. But that shot on the left just makes me think of an asylum. It looks a little bit creepy. So here is the corner room that I got to see. So the reason I put Mr. Pavoni in a corner room is because that's the one I got to see. I got to see room number 206 in the Montvale Hotel. And I looked out the corner window, and there was the Review building just down the street. So it's that pointed top on the red brick right there. That's the Review building. And that's exactly where it would have been in 1901. So it's just so cool to actually be in that room. As you can tell, it has been modernized quite a bit. So the Montvale is gorgeous now. And it was much simpler in 1901. So as I said, there are more locations like the Spokesman Review building. This is a closer up of the Spokesman Review building further down the street. I have not been upstairs yet, but it is a gorgeous building from the outside. And it is still where the Spokesman lives, though most of their work is done across the street in a newer, more modern building. But that building is still there. And that building actually got a clock, I believe. Yeah, that was the clock that was there before the clock tower went in at the depot. So that would have been more of the central clock of downtown Spokane before the depot went in and became the clock tower. So there are other fun locations that are included throughout the book, including one other one I wanted to mention, Dodson's Jewelry Store, which unfortunately actually just recently closed its doors. It was open for 131 years of business in Spokane. And if you ask anybody who has grown up in Spokane, they'll talk about meeting at the clock outside of Dodson's. There was a big clock that hung outside of the front, and it was the meeting place. It was, oh, let me meet you downtown. I'll meet you at the clock at Dodson's. So this is the inside as you walk in. And again, I got to feature this in my book. I have actually my clockmaker walks in here to ask about a watch. And it was a, toy department. There's a whole toy department downstairs. There's books for sale on the left. And then there's jewelry and watches on the right, and art for sale up above. So it was just so cool. I was able to find who was the manager at the time of Dodson's. So he gets to cameo in the book as well. So it's just so much fun to include all of those throughout the book, throughout all the books, because Spokane's history is just, it's so fascinating. Let's see. So that's the Montvale, and I believe that was all I had for you today. I did want to mention, one of the things that I really tried to do, I think I kind of mentioned this earlier, was use buildings that you can actually still go into, more locations that you can actually still visit. So if you go to my website, you can actually find an interactive Google map where I have been marking the locations of my books on an actual map of today. So you can go on the map and go, oh, look, there's City Hall. Well, City Hall in 1901 is not where it is today. It's actually closer to where the Louvre Carousel is now, which again wasn't built until after my time period, so it won't be making an appearance in my books. But City Hall is on there, and then I found, like, in the city listings where each of the policemen worked, where they lived. So I was able to feature their homes on the map. The Montvale is on there. I actually just updated it, so it includes all the locations from Cupboards All Bared as well. So if you're interested, you can go there and look at that. For more of all the history that is sprinkled throughout, and I'm updating it all the time, definitely visit my website, patricia-meredith.com. And the rest is history or historical mystery. This is just the beginning. This is just the first 2 books. As I said, the 3rd book is coming probably October. We'll just say fall of this year. And then we'll be taking a short break, and then I'll release the next 3 books in the series. And like I said, I am pushing for about 12 to 13 books spanning the building of the clock tower. So available now through the Spokane Public Library in all formats. You can get the first book and the second one. I did find the audiobook on Hoopla. So if you have Hoopla on your phone, you can get the audiobook through the Spokane Public Library. And then the other formats are coming soon. They are hard at work doing that. I also wanted to mention, if you enjoyed hearing this about the Campbells and Hangman Creek and all of that, save the date, because July 30th, I'll be doing a whole walkthrough and reading and Q&A and all sorts of things at the Campbell House. So you can actually do this tour with me at the Campbell House. I'll be walking through and telling you how it inspired all of the book. I'll be reading more from my books, and just talking about the research behind it, and how the Campbells influenced my writing. So mark your calendars, put it out there, get a ticket to come out to Spokane and stay at the Montvale, and then you can just do the whole thing all at once. So if you have any questions, be sure to follow me as at @PMeredithAuthor, my Facebook author page, and then on Instagram and Goodreads. And subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's actually where I've been sharing presentations like this one, and interviews and readings. I've actually recently been posting more readings from Cupboards All Bared, especially now that with this one, I have a lot more pictures this time around. So I'm including a lot of pictures so you can see what Coroner Nathan M. Baker looks like. So when I'm reading that section, you can see his face up on the screen, or like the Campbell House, like I just did, where you're walking through. So again, visit my website, patricia-meredith.com, sign up for my newsletter so you'll be the first to hear when and where I am. And you can purchase signed copies from me there also, or just email me directly at author@patricia-meredith.com. All right, any questions?
I'm going to go back into the chat. So there's some questions throughout the presentation, but I did not want to interrupt your flow.
Thank
so
you.
The first one is, how do you choose the historical tie-ins for each book?
Yeah, so I've got that timeline of the clock tower, and then I've got it divided by month. And then I start by looking at all the articles published around that time period. And trying to see if there's anything that happened in Spokane's history that I can tie in. And then specifically looking for anything that takes place at a location that you can still visit today, because I get goosebumps then, right? You're walking around Spokane, you're like, oh, there it is, that's where it happened, right? So there are certain locations that I've started a separate list now of Spokane locations that exist post 1914. because that's when like the Davenport Hotel was built, was 1914. And so I'm thinking I might have to do another series later because there's a lot of things that came into existence after 1914. But for now, I've got 1901. I'm sticking to it, and I just find things all the time. And if you ever have an idea, shoot it my way. I've got a list started. I've got a whole document of books that I have to read, and important Spokane people, locations, events that are happening. And basically that's how the story ends up coming together, is I grab, a couple of each of those, and it all pieces together into the next historical mystery. So.
I love it. All right, next question. You say Gilded Age, and I've never really known what that means or where it comes from.
Yes. So most people will talk about the Victorian age and then the Edwardian age, but we do not live in the UK. So the American terms are Gilded Age, and Gilded Age kind of refers actually to a little bit before. So it's the end of Victorian age, about like 1880, 1890, till about 1920, right? 1920, everything changes again. No, 1914. 1914, everything changes. Europe goes to war. We soon enter afterwards, and the world changes, as we all know, recent events, right? That happens. And so the Victorian age ends in 1901. In January 1901, Victoria dies, and her son, Edward, takes on the throne. And he is the king for 10 years until 1910. So basically 1901 to 1910 is the Edwardian age. So like Mary Poppins is a very common example. Anne of Green Gables, Wizard of Oz, all of those are Gilded Age, Victorian, end of Victorian, beginning of Edwardian. So that's what the Gilded Age talks about. So, yeah.
All right. And so you did just reference your clothes. Someone asked about where did you get your period clothes? They look amazing.
Yes, thank you. So I use Recollections. They make historical garments. So if you go to recollections.biz, I think it is, B-I-Z, they actually have a wonderful website of all sorts of historical clothes from, man, they go all the way back to like Polonaise era. So Civil War, 1850s, that time period, all the way through. Recently, they've been doing a little bit more like Roaring 20s, 1920s, and they have some retro clothes too. Retro 50s is usually, the A-line dress, the fun A-line dress. So I chose 1901. So I've been specifically shopping in that time period, trying to find different garments. And then the hair, I just have to try to make it work. I kind of went for an Anne of Green Gables look today, or as my daughter pointed out, I look like Dolly in Hello Dolly, which is another Gilded Age movie, American Gilded Age movie. Highly recommend. Actually, their costuming in that movie is spot on. It's one of the few historical time set movies where I think also the hair is very accurate. Don't take my word for it. There are people who know better about that on YouTube. Definitely look for those. I love watching the videos about, what's accurate and what's not. But as far as I could tell, Hello Dolly was really, really well costumed. So.
All right, so that was the last question on there. There's a lot of lively chat that you can take
Excellent.
a peek at if you want. But I'm going to turn off the live stream now, and then anyone in this program can unmute and talk. Okay, so I will. All right, so we're not live streaming anymore. So if you have something you want to say on mic, go ahead. I thought it was very interesting.
Well, thank you. Good.
Am I on?
Yeah.
I love the comparison pictures from the old, like the Hangman Creek stuff.
Yes.
It really brought that to life because I've read the book, which is wonderful.
Thank you.
But to be able to see it in the time period is really neat. Yeah. So I love that you have all that. Do you ever find any of that at the library, or you said some other archive place?
Yes, so mostly at the archives, because the library has been under construction downtown in Spokane. So the Northwest Room, which is where I also would have done that sort of research. However, since the pandemic and because they're under construction, they have been scanning all sorts of documents and putting them up online, which is awesome because it means no matter where you are in the world, you can find these documents. So again, like with the Campbells, if you go to the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture website, they have scanned images of even what's in the Campbell House. So like all the things I was mentioning that they have tracked down and where it comes from, you can look up their object collections and you can search for Campbell and you'll find everything, her wedding dress and all of those things in the tea set. And so I can find now exactly which items in the house were original Campbell and which weren't. And then, and so then the Ferris Archives is located in between the Northwest Museum of Arts and Culture and the Campbell House. So that's where I've been doing most of my research. I've gotten along really, really well with the research assistants there. Alex Fergus in particular, shout out to him. He has been a huge help. He and I get so excited when we find things. We actually we were working on book 4, but we came across a flip book from 1902 and he was like, well, I know this is 1902, so it's right after your time period. But maybe you can use it anyway. And it was police and firefighter close-up shots. They did like a flip book with like ads and then it has a close-up shot of each of the police officers, which up till now I've been working off of a far away shot that was published in the paper and then just like counting faces until I got to the right one and going, okay, that one is, Desk Sergeant Hallway and describing him based off of that. So we flipped through it and we realized that even though it's published in 1902, it's almost all people who were in the force in 1901. They go through cutbacks in October, which again, it's mentioned a lot in my book. That'll be impending doom for Bernard and Thomas. We'll see who makes the cut. So finding that book was just super exciting. And so sometimes library, I've been checking out books. And then I found a couple thrift stores where they've actually had the books that I had found at the library that I kept checking out over and over again. And so I was finally able to get my hands on my own copies of them.